Today we're going to look at the state of New York. And yes, it's the state of New York, not just the city of New York. New York's one of those places where it's kind of like that. With Florida. With Florida, somebody says Florida, everybody thinks of either Miami or Orlando typically, or a beach somewhere. But with New York, everybody thinks about the city of New York. But as you'll see, the state of New York is far more expansive than just one city out on the point. And I'm going to actually hold that off until the very end. So we'll begin in the northern part of upper New York, which is extremely rural. You have these areas up here in the Adirondacks, and there's not a whole lot up here as far as civilization is concerned. And so often we don't think about places like that in the state of New York, unless you're from the Northeast. So I kind of have the perspective that people from the North and the Midwest have on the South, because I'm from the South. Uh, the people up in this area have an understanding of the South to say, well, it's just some particular things, like certain cities or a beach somewhere, and they forget about you know the different geographical areas and all the topography that is the South, from the mountains in Tennessee and North Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, that area, down to the coastal areas and everything in between. But this part of Upper New York, it's extremely rural. Um, you have the Adirondack Mountains up here. You have um, areas along the Lake Ontario. Uh, and so most of it is rural in this area, just mountains and lakes, and not a whole lot of, I guess, civilization, if you want to say that, but nevertheless beautiful. And along the northern portion, you have large areas like Lake Oneida or Oneida Lake, and then probably the large city that everything floats around in this area. Everything is built around is Syracuse, where you have the University of Syracuse, and you have other lakes that become part of the great features of these areas. So in this area, um, like when you scroll and stroll through the South, um, a lot of the major cities are at one point along rivers. Well, a lot of the major cities here in Upper New York are built around these large lakes that you find here, including the Finger Lakes, which are right here. And if you'll notice, at the bottom of this particular Finger Lake, you have Ithaca, which is Cornell University, is where you find Cornell University and, of course, Ithaca College. So a lot of these areas are built up around these large lakes that you find in this area. And then, of course, the largest lake connected is right here in Lake Ontario. And of course, across Lake Ontario, you have Canada. And so, you know, New York shares this large border divided by a river with Canada. And so you have this area being the geographical barrier that we have on our border to the north. You have large cities like Rochester, New York. Um, uh, Again, you have a large river that runs through and it running to Lake Ontario. And these areas are built up around those rivers and lakes in northern New York. And as you make your way over to the other border, you'll see that there's the border, the dividing border between Canada and the United States. And this is another area when people think about New York, this is another thing that comes to mind is Niagara Falls. And of course, there's a Canadian side of the falls, and then there's the American side of the falls. And, you know, arguments about which side is better, the Canadian side or the American side. I've been on both and I enjoyed both. Um, but you have Canada here along the border of New York, and you see the US side right here, and then the Canadian side over here. And so New York has Niagara Falls, and so does Canada. And one place that not a lot of people actually talk about when they talk about uh, Niagara Falls is the Whirlpool State Park, and it's another really neat natural area that you could go and visit. Also, moving south, you have the large city of Buffalo, New York, along actually the northern part of Lake Erie. So you pull out and you'll see Lake Erie right here, and then the dividing line between New York and Pennsylvania that comes down before you get to the actual town of Erie, Pennsylvania. Along the southern portion of New York here, uh, again, it's rural, much like northern Pennsylvania, which it's sharing a border with. Uh, Not much different in between the two. Uh, Nothing uniquely, distinctly New York. That's going to tell you this is the difference between the two, which is, you know, probably the vast majority of places that you come to. That's the case. There's not anything really uniquely, Mississippi when you go from Mississippi into Alabama. They're just pretty much the same. Um, but there is something that's uniquely New York, and that is the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is in Cooperstown, New York. And Cooperstown is just small town with this wonderful thing, which is the Baseball Hall of Fame. Again, it's right at the base of one of these large lakes. Um, Beautiful area of the country, and then as you go north, we kind of go back up, and we ultimately see some of these resort areas along uh, the state of New York. You have Glen Falls down into the Saratoga Springs area and Saratoga Lake. A lot of these places became popular in the 1900s because people from the actual city of New York would go and summer in these areas kind of to get out of the city. And they built up. And then, of course, what town that was already built up along the Hudson River is the actual capital of New York, and that is Albany. Albany, New York, right here along the Hudson River, north of the city of New York. And so, people would take the train up to these areas, and they would now deal with legislative matters here in Albany. Now, the stories. One of the things that makes me think of is the story of Theodore Roosevelt, who was actually in the legislature for the state of New York, and he was in Albany when he got word that his wife and mother are dying, and he has to get on a train and go back to the city of New York. And so it's just north of the city here along the Hudson River. As you go down, you go through the area of the Catskills and the actual city of Catskill along the Hudson River, down into Hyde Park, Highland, and you keep going down the Hudson until you ultimately get into the area of the city of New York. And you can see the vast difference between large portion of rural New York north of Albany up in the Adirondacks and all of that area, and then you come down into this area, which is New York, the city of New York, and Long Island. And so when people think of New York, this is what they think of, right? They think of the Empire State Building. They think of Lower Manhattan and the financial district and the Statue of Liberty, which is actually over in New Jersey. Think about Governor's Island on down. Ultimately, um, the different neighborhoods and boroughs and the different places that you find out. I am no expert on the city of New York. I unfortunately have never been to the city of New York. And I just know of its vastness because I love looking at these maps and seeing the differences between the places in which we live. And so you may be watching this from the state of New York or the city of New York, and you say, well, why didn't you mention this? Why didn't you mention this? Because I don't know those things. And so if you're watching this and you've got great suggestions about New York and where to go and what to do, post them in the comments. I would love to know, and others who watch this would love to know about your city, about your state. And this is hopefully what this will become, where we get to have a dialogue about what we love about the place we're from. So please do. Please feel free to do that. So there's all kinds of different areas that you can explore, but it gets out to, if we kind of pull back, Long Island, which is part of New York. And, I'm really not only a student of geography, but I'm a student of history. So uh, I also love national historic areas. And one particular person from history I love is Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt built a house, which is called Sagamore Hill, out on Long Island and Oyster Bay. And this is where he built his house with his second wife, his first wife died in childbirth, giving birth to his daughter. Um, and this is where you can find that area um, in New York, Oyster Bay, and his house, Sagamore Hill. And of course, it goes on out to Long Island. People have moved out here over the years. Some people actually commute, maybe not as far out here every day into New York, but closer on in, people do commute regularly into New York, the downtown area from Long Island every day. A lot can be said about New York. Again, I'm just kind of giving an overview of all of these states. I've been to parts of New York, but there's other parts I've not had the opportunity to go to. But maybe throughout time, I'll have the opportunity to go there. And so my knowledge is unfortunately limited, but I just want to, bring some highlight and some area to look at certain areas of the country, and New York is one of those areas where I think it's wonderful. And it's a wonderful state, but again, it's one of those states that the entire state doesn't get the love and the highlight that it should, because most people focus on the city rather than the entire state. Thanks for watching today.